Perhaps importantly, when we start sketching is basically how we sort of control our environment. Now, that's not only the workspace, which we probably pretty much want to declutter, and obviously what sort of instrument we're going to use, what pen or pencil we're going to use, but it's also about how we're sitting. And, you know, if we have a tendency to slouch, or we're sticking an elbow on the table to sort of prop our body up, then again, that might actually have a sort of impact on how quick we can sketch, or even about our mindset, really, how we're thinking about that creative process. So bear it in mind. What I tend to do is I tend to sit fairly upright to begin with, and I want to try and use the levers of my arm. So on occasion you might find that you're not actually resting your hand on the piece of paper as you're sketching. Sometimes you're actually able to sort of articulate your joints and actually be a little bit more freer, and consequently be a little bit more confident in some of those shapes which are like difficult, like ellipses or sort of arcing shapes or sort of compound curve shapes. First and foremost, I think when we start sketching, we just want to be confident with our line making. And to this end, I think the first thing I'd like to talk to you about is sort of what I say to the students on pretty much week one when I see them. It's about understanding, obviously, the equipment. In this case, I've just got a propelling pencil. But it's also then having that confidence to actually create some lines and create some marks. First and foremost, of course, as I mentioned earlier on, we have these pivots. So if I want to create a straight line, for instance, there will be a way that naturally I will be able to be more confident with that line being straight. And perhaps if I wanted to create a line going across here, if I'm not careful, you might find that actually rather than it being a straight line, it's actually a curve. And that's because what's happening here is I'm not ideally placed in alignment with the piece of paper, and I'm using the sort of pivot of my elbow, and I'm unable to sort of move my arm across this way and this way, because what's happening is my elbow's hitting my body. So I need to think about my pivots and obviously how it impacts upon my body, okay? But maybe also I need to think about my workspace. And what you'll find is a lot of designers actually, when they do their sketches, a little bit dynamic. So you'll see YouTube videos where people might very statically sketch things, okay? But what you're finding is they're actually having to sort of compensate their arm to actually do this, okay? Now, when we're sort of approaching sketching at the beginning, what we want to do is we want to do the things that are going to help us, are going to make us feel more confident. And to this end, what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about is the first thing I get students to do, which is creating a cube in perspective, but also a cube so that it's proportionally correct, and sort of how we might approach that on a piece of paper. So let me just flip over a piece of paper here. Okay. So first and foremost, I think I'm going to start. I have a tendency to start and draw the top of the cube. So I'll do this, okay? And then, of course, if I wasn't moving the piece of paper, I'd have to sort of move my arm, and I'm going to have to sort of pivot my joints to be able to sort of create these lines more confidently. Perhaps instead, I can look at the piece of paper and I can think, well, perhaps if I move the piece of paper, I can then use this piece of paper, and where I feel comfortable drawing lines is naturally sort of in this sort of alignment. And now I feel confident drawing my straight lines across here, and across here, okay? They're pretty much parallel because all I'm doing is I'm moving my arm back, okay? And again, now if I rotate my piece of paper, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to shadow this line here. You'll probably see designers doing this as well on sketch videos. And what I'm going to do is pretty much just move my arm down, and I'm going to do the same there. Again, I'm going to rotate my piece of paper. Okay, I'm going to do that. Let's just do it again. Cube's okay. It's three faces at the moment. I haven't got any internal structure on this, but let's look at the process again. So again, probably create the top. Move my piece of paper around. Whether I draw that line first and these, it doesn't really matter too much, okay? But what you'll find now is I'm making this sort of judgment call, not only in terms of aligning this, but also how far down I actually move to create this cube. And in this case, I'm going to extend this now to being a shape which has got some sort of internal form. So again, I'm going to shadow this. I'm going to rotate my piece of paper again so I can make my alignments here, and I'm then going to do that. And then finally I can move my piece of paper again and get that upright. Now, it's a little bit messy. As you can see here, I've gone a couple of times with the lines, and if this was ultimately going to be a sort of construction box for some design that I then wanted to carry on with. Again, it's about the pressure that I might apply when I'm sketching. So in this instance, if I'm drawing the cube as a construction object to allow me to create something in proportion, then what I might do is I might sketch it much looser, okay, or lighter, okay. So you can see here, it's a much lighter sort of pencil weight, okay, again, fairly light. And then what I can do is I can start to a bit more critically now sort of build up the form that I want to create, whatever that may be. In this case, it's, I don't know, let's just say it's a little printer or something here. And you can see that I'm working my piece of paper around so that I'm constantly, proportionally, okay, getting all this information down. And obviously, if I was to carry on with this sketch, I might do things like put things in shadow. I might put little highlights in. Again, I might drop a shadow on the piece of paper itself so it looks like it's actually casting a shadow onto a floor. So that's a great method of allowing a design to look like it's actually seated within the piece of paper itself.